Like I mentioned, my name's Carly, and today I'm going to talk to you about interviews for developers by developers. So like I mentioned, my name's Carly. Here is a totally candid, definitely not posed at all photo of me in New York City where I live and work. I'm an engineering manager at a company called Galileo Health, which is a tech-enabled healthcare company, and we provide virtual primary care to our patients. I live and work in New York City, like I said. Before being an engineering manager, I have about 8 years of experience doing software engineering as an individual contributor. And recently, in the last year and a half, have transitioned to engineering management, which has me thinking more about things like interviewing and how it kind of sucks, both for candidates and for companies, to be honest. I want to start by talking about just who this talk is geared for, who my target audience is. This is a talk that's actually more so for companies rather than candidates. Talking to you all as people who, a lot of you probably work at small and mid-sized companies who are trying to hire the best talent as quickly as you can. And I'm going to talk about I think, how interviewing can impact your goals as a company and some problems with it. I'm going to start with a personal story. So a few years ago, I got to that point in my career that many of us get to, where you kind of feel it's time for a change, right? You're getting a little comfortable. I was getting comfortable at my current job. I felt like I was maybe learning things less quickly, and I really wanted to test the skills and the tools that I've learned about at a different company. At this phase, I felt really eager and excited. There's so many cool startups and companies to work for. I felt like the world was my oyster, right? And I started looking around a little bit. I had a manager that I used to work with at an old company, and he had gone to Facebook. So I was talking to him about a potential role on his team, and it sounded very cool. It sounded right up my alley. I really liked working with this manager in the past. He wanted to work with me again, and I thought it would be a great chance for me to see what I could bring to Facebook and also to see what I could learn from there too. So we took it to the next phase, introduced me to a recruiter. I got involved in the formal interview process with Facebook. Conversation with the recruiter was great also. It seemed like an awesome match for my skills and what I wanted to learn. So I was very excited. Then, wrapping up, she was like, okay, the next step is going to be for you to probably study a little bit and be prepared to do 3 to 4 medium-level LeetCode problems in the span of an hour and a half. And so I was like, oh, that's going to take some time. So Facebook suffered a great loss that day. I'm just joking. But in reality, what happened was that in my time that I was studying for these LeetCode problems, I was looking at other companies too and interested in things that other people were doing. And I just ended up progressing in those interviews quickly and getting to the offer stage with them, and decided to take a job with one of those companies instead. So I never really finished my studying phase with Facebook. I never actually even tried to do that first round interview. I never got to see what that role at Facebook could have looked like, and Facebook never really got to even assess my technical competence. Real quick, I've been using this word LeetCode a few times. In case you don't know, LeetCode is a platform that a lot of software engineers use to basically practice software engineering interview questions. You can go to the website. They have a bunch of really commonly used questions, and they're tagged by company that use them. You can type in your answers, run it against test cases, see how efficient your solutions are, and it's really widely used. Okay, so like I mentioned before, for this talk, you've heard my personal story now. I want to show you some data to talk about the actual impact of this style of interviewing, and then some possible solutions or alternative approaches you could take for assessing technical competence. So yeah, you heard from me, but it's really not just me. This is a widely held feeling in the industry. You saw it in the intro here, the fact that technical interviews seem scary. So North Carolina State University and Microsoft teamed up in 2019 to do a study. They called it Hiring is Broken, What Do Developers Say About Technical Interviews? The way they structured the study is that they went through Hacker News. They found about 500-ish posts that all related to interviewing. And then they analyzed about 46,000 comments on those posts to sort of pull out what the general industry was feeling about interviewing. And suffice to say, people feel pretty negatively about it. They don't like it. I'm going to go through like the top-level themes that were pulled out in this study from that sentiment analysis, because I think it really illustrates the problems with this style of interviewing. First, problem solving is not grounded in real-world code, constraints, or scenarios. There's stress associated with problem solving in conjunction with time pressure and surveillance of the interviewer, so like a feeling of being watched. There are emotions such as frustration and even humiliation associated with the technical interview experience. There's a lack of naturally occurring resources and mechanisms typically available in a normal programming environment, for example, coding with a marker or in a Word document. So this is like not having access to your IDE, to your linting, that sort of stuff, autocomplete. The sheer time commitment that's needed to practice and grind through various problems and solutions in order to be competitive with other candidates. This is definitely something that got to me with the Facebook story, right? I just didn't really want to put in that much time. And there's a feeling that this evaluation criteria filters out candidates unfairly. So I also pulled out a few of the quotes, like the actual comments on these Hacker News posts to sort of bring it back to the human level. I'll go through those. Building a great and useful app rarely requires Herculean feats of logic and puzzle solving. If you can't solve most algorithm questions on a whiteboard in less than an hour because you haven't practiced, then you won't pass any interviews. I have come to believe it is part of an industry-wide negging style to keep people in their place. So this is the kind of sentiment that people are feeling about this style of interviews. There's like broad sense of discouragement of them, so much so that there's enough demand that I came across this like community-driven and pretty active GitHub repository called Hiring Without Whiteboards, which candidates come to specifically to find companies that don't use this style of interviewing. So this means people are self-selecting to literally choose which companies they'll work at based on the interview style that they are administering. So bringing this back to like your incentives as a company, right? This is probably something like what your hiring funnel looks like. You have a big chunk of recruiting, right? It narrows down to technical screen, an on-site, an offer, and finally a hire. This style of interviewing is potentially making people bounce out of your recruiting funnel at the very top level. So that means you're not even getting the chance to bring in and sell like some of the most competent candidates on your company and why they should work there. Okay, so maybe candidates don't like it, maybe it's narrowing the top of your funnel, but there's a sense that if you use this style of interviewing, at least you'll get the best candidates who are definitely the most competent and will be great at the job. So let's talk a little bit about reliability. There's a platform called interviewing.io, which is pretty interesting. It's like a platform for practicing these sort of interview questions with real FAANG employees like Facebook, Amazon, Google, etc. What interviewees do is they'll pay about $200 per practice interview, which is kind of a lot, and they'll be able to basically get a mock interview with a real employee like from Google who actually administers interviews at that company in order to practice. Quick side note, there's like a ton of these sort of companies. It's like a whole industry that's propped up to help people practice for these interviews, which I think just also demonstrates potentially like how gamified this is at this point and how much doing your job doesn't actually prepare you to do your job. You have to do something else. But okay, back to interviewing.io. So this like sort of position of having all these mock interviews has put interviewing.io in an interesting position of having a bunch of data that they can analyze based on like interviewee performance, interviewer consistency, stuff like that, that they can just make public. Like they're different from Google in that they don't need to keep that data private. So they made a great blog post with some data analysis. I'm going to walk us through that. But first, a quick note on scoring. So the way that these practice interviews work is they have the interview, and then the interviewer will give the interviewee a score at the end of it from 1 through 4, where 1 is just not very good. 2 is okay. 3 is good, you're probably going to get advanced to the next round. And 4 is great, definite yes. Okay, so warning, we're going to look at a graph now. I'm going to walk us through it slowly. It will be confusing at first. Okay, so this here is a graph of the standard deviation versus the mean, the average score of an interviewee. Each one of these little people icons on the graph represents an individual interviewee, like candidate. On the x-axis, they're plotted with their average score. And on the y-axis, they're plotted with the standard deviation of their average score. So you can see, for example, the people down here are performing consistently. They're getting the same score on every single interview round that they did. That ended up being 25% of candidates who would consistently get the same score, which means 75% of people are not getting the same score from round to round. For example, here's one person all the way, so this is like one person highlighted. Each of these other dots represent individual interviews that they did and the score that they got. So there's a little cluster above the 2 that's showing that they got 5 2s. It looks like they got 4 3s, and they got 2 4s. So you can see this individual is, on a good day, going to be great and get a 4. On most of their days, they're going to pass. But on about half, like a little bit less than half of their days, they're going to fail and not make it through to the next round. So like, what would you think about this individual? Are they should you hire them? Like, I actually like am not sure what this means. I think it just means that you can get really varying signal from this sort of problem. And it's not just this person. Right here, what this is highlighting is, this is showing the scores for everyone who got a 4 at some point and then also got a 2. So this shows that a lot of people who get a lot of 4s also get a lot of 2s. And that is the difference between a hire and a no hire. You might think like, oh, but interviewing.io is a practice platform. People should be getting better with time, right? They also did a little quick analysis into like performance over time and saw that it was just also kind of a hot mess, and these like variations aren't accounted for just by practice. All to say that I just don't think you can make a confident decision with one data point here. If you're gonna maybe run somebody through like 4 or 5 of these style of rounds, you can probably start to get at a reasonable guess of what their actual average score will be. But with one data point, you might be getting someone who is all 2s, mostly 2s, on a 4-day, or vice versa, right? So it's just very difficult to make a really confident decision reliably with just one data point. And I would imagine most small and medium companies, that's what they have to work with. 1, maybe 2 technical rounds. More than that will steer candidates away. Okay, so another argument I hear for this style of interview is that it removes bias, right? It's very meritocratic. Everybody gets the same question. There's the same answer as expected. We're just measuring skills. It doesn't matter what you look like. So let's talk about it being unbiased. Microsoft and North Carolina State University are doing great work on this topic. They teamed up again. They did another study called Does Stress Impact Technical Interview Performance? The structure of this study was basically to take about 50 students, 50, so the N is like not huge here. Keep that in mind. But 50 students, put half of them in a private interview setting and the other half in a public interview setting. They gave them the same exact question. In the private one, the interviewees were given a whiteboard, a marker, and told to solve the problem and then explain it later. In the public one, they were asked to think out loud while they were solving the problem, and they had an observer watching them solve the problem. The results are kind of shocking for me. 63% of candidates passed in the private session, while only 38% of candidates passed in the public session, which is a significant decrease. That means, like, coming back to your funnel, that if you're using this style of interview practice, you might be taking candidates who are perfectly competent and probably have the skills and are able to solve these problems and filtering them out of your process at the technical screen level, just for whatever effects there are about performance anxiety. Another interesting effect is that 100% of the female candidates passed in the private session and 0% of the female candidates passed in the public session. The N is really small here. It's like 5 in one group and 6 in one group. I hope people study it more. I think this is really fascinating. You know, I have no idea why this is the case. Maybe it's something to do with performance anxiety impacting women more. I don't know. That's at least what's suggested in the paper, potentially. But to the extent that your goal is, as a company, to hire these underrepresented groups, and specifically women, into software engineering roles, this style of interviewing might actually be undermining your goal of doing that, right? You actually might be making it even more difficult for women to join your company. So if that's your goal, this might not be a great way to achieve it. Speaking more about just the burden that's put on candidates for doing this style of interviewing, there's like a senior manager at Google who quoted a while back that he suggests people do about 40 practice problems before going in for a round of these interviews, which I just guessed for myself would probably be something like 60 practice hours, if not more, which is really a significant time commitment that you're asking of candidates. I think this can also probably undermine your goal of hiring some underrepresented groups in technology. Like, for example, moms are going to have a hard time finding that amount of time. Another underrepresented group is maybe just people who want to have a life outside of work and not spend all their time on LeetCode and like get outside. This is sort of what happened for me. So all to say that I think that this style of interviewing, this observed like problem-solving, algorithm-y, LeetCode-y style of interviewing might be just as biased and unreliable as other interview types. And it steers many candidates away. Right? Coming back to your funnel, you're just shrinking your funnel potentially by forcing people to go through this style of interview. And really, I don't think necessarily getting a better signal than other kinds. Okay, so what to do about this? I've written out a few ideas of possible interviewing alternatives that I'll run through. One is maybe a take-home project. We see this throughout the industry often. The pitfalls, I think, there's some caveats that I would add to make this successful, which is to ask for a small amount of time, something like 1 to 3 hours for a commitment. Sometimes people do take-homes that are like 10 hours or more. I think that can steer people away for sure. Have a rubric so that you know what you're looking for, what you're hoping from the take-home project, and people can grade it consistently. And give candidates a way to ask questions. I think the thing you lose with take-home projects is sometimes that synchronous communication. So they should have some sort of way, probably, to get in contact with you and clarify ambiguity. Another option is to do some pair programming on existing code. This is what my company does, actually. What we do is we set up a really small code base. We import it into CoderPad, and then we have candidates work together with us to try to iterate on it or fix bugs, stuff like that. Whenever I give this interview, I honestly try as hard as I can to just forget what the code base even does, so I'm really genuinely am working with the candidate on it. I like this because you get to see a lot of very practical skills that you actually use on the job, like debugging. How do you figure out what's going wrong with the program? Reading code. This is a huge skill, like the ability to actually read an existing piece of code and figure out what's going on. Fixing broken tests, so being able to read tests, understand what's going on, debug them, and actually fix them. And then even writing new tests, which is sort of a different way of thinking that I like to see candidates go through. A caveat I'll say for this one is to just definitely be prepared to help candidates with syntax. It's inevitable you probably won't be able to set up these little code bases in all the preferred languages of different candidates. But I find that with candidates who don't even know this, like they might not know JavaScript syntax, but usually they can read it enough to kind of understand. I can help them through it. I even write some of the code that they're talking about or fix some of their syntax. And so you actually get a sense of like what it would be like to really work together. Another option is maybe allow for problem solving in private and then retroactive explanations. If you like this style of problem, you could potentially at least remove some of the performance anxiety issues with it by allowing candidates to just work on their own and then explain it to you. And finally, maybe have a round that's like reviewing code instead of writing it. We do this at my company also. And there are some roles where like being able to read, understand, review, coach, critique code is absolutely critical to doing the job. And some people can't do that well. So I find this to be a good competency to assess for also. And candidates tend to really like this one. Finally, something I'm thinking about is like, could we give candidates options? Like, could we have like a few different ways of assessing technical competency and let candidates actually choose which one they think they'll show up for best? When I'm interviewing a candidate, like, I want to know where are their talents, what can they really bring to this company, how could they be utilized here, like, to maximize our chance of success, right? And I think a lot of candidates will have a sense of potentially how they'll show up best, like which one of these formats will work best for them and how they'll be able to most showcase their skills. So I haven't tried this yet, but I think it could be interesting to literally have a few different options of a first round for candidates. If none of these sounded great to you, but you're not sure what else to do, I would encourage you to go maybe look for some more inspiration on this list of companies. You probably know people at these companies. Maybe you can talk to them, ask them how their interview processes have been going, if they are happy with the candidates coming through the door, and get more inspiration that way. So to wrap it up, I don't think there's like a perfect silver bullet of an interview that will solve all of our problems exactly. What I do think, though, is that the industry standard that we've landed on is not fun for candidates and is literally steering them away from joining your company. I think small and medium companies can actually have a competitive advantage against some of these larger companies who are stuck in this interview pattern because people will come interview at your company earlier while they're studying for their Google interview and get interested in your company and actually join it before they even really have the chance to go through Google's process, for example. So yeah, I'd encourage you all to examine your interview process, see if it's really serving your company, see if you can have a competitive advantage by actually maybe changing it, making it more friendly to candidates. And yeah, hopefully that will bring you more success in hiring. So thank you, that's what I have for you. Quick citation slide here. All the art was done by DALL-E, generated by DALL-E, by the way, which was very fun to try to get that to do what I wanted it to do. Here are links if you're interested, if you want to read more about these studies or the blog post. Galileo's hiring, come talk to me if you're interested. And of course, find me at the party later if you want to talk more about it. Thanks.